Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to welcome you to the committee. Just have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to say that I am a proponent of the mandatory legislation. I feel very strongly that there has to be consequences, and there has to be seen to be consequences. If people are going to go and commit these premeditated crimes, there has to be, at the end of the day, they have to realize they're going to pay for it if they get caught. The other point I would like to make is that that doesn't seem to be discussed that much around this table is the question of the victims. And I'm hopeful that next week a mother of a child from my part of Canada, rural Canada, is going to be here as a witness. She lost her daughter a year ago in a drug overdose, 17 years of age. And you're going to hear a real human story of the effects of people preying on other people for the sake of making money. And I believe it's unforgivable. Mr. Minister, perhaps you could, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the provinces and the territories. I think it would be beneficial to us to maybe, if you could expound on your discussions with the provinces and the territories and how they support the legislation and what their positions are.
They're probably getting tired of me talking about this particular bill, Senator, quite frankly, but in my discussions with my provincial counterparts, I've reiterated again, as I did at my most recent meeting in Vancouver with them, that we were proceeding with these, that we had been listening to law enforcement agencies that are operating particularly in the major cities of this country, that we will continue to move forward on this. I mean, one of the interesting developments that a number of them have pointed out to me is that these grow operations are moving out of the major cities, that the people who are into the business of trafficking and the gangs and the organized crime that are involved with these marijuana grow ops, that many of them like to get outside the major cities. They're hoping that there's a little less scrutiny, a little more space between themselves and their next door neighbor. And so this is, they tell me, a more recent development in the marijuana grow operation business, if I can call it a business. And so I assured them that, again, that the bill that I had reintroduced into this Parliament and that we were pushing, makes it very clear that we understand that this is a business, that these individuals are in the business of trafficking, and that I would do my best to push this legislation that has some serious consequences for people who think it's a good idea to get into the production of marijuana. But that was one of the developments that I have just seen in the last, I suppose, 4 years that I have been Justice Minister. I get more and more individuals telling me now that these difficult crimes as they relate to drugs are moving out of the big cities. I mean, they're still in the big cities, they're still a problem, but some aspects of it are outside the municipal boundaries. And so, again, I gave them my assurances that I would do my very best to get this particular piece of legislation, and I'm very pleased at all the feedback that I've received from them on that.
I'm making the senators be as tight as I can. I'm going to ask you if you could just a little bit tighten up your answer.
I'm in your hands, Madam Chair, whatever you want.
Yes, Senator.
Just to follow up on that, I take it, just for the record, that the provinces and the territories support this legislation.
They're all aware of this, and all the comments that I received were supportive.
Going to another area that you mentioned in your opening remarks, the Aboriginal Justice Strategy. I think it's a concern of all of us around this table, the number of First Nation people that are incarcerated and have been involved one way or the other with the law enforcement. And the government has committed $85 million towards the Aboriginal community justice programs. Do you have a yardstick that you actually can measure the success of those particular programs? Perhaps you can expand a little bit further on it. The reason I'm asking this is that I think, as Senator Wallace made the point, we're looking at two aspects here. We're trying to either get people away from drugs or not involved with drugs, but deal with those that are actually trafficking. So there's a number of aspects that we have to deal with, and I think the public should be aware of that. Perhaps you could comment on that.
You've raised a very good point, Senator. I'm a big fan of the Aboriginal Justice Strategy because I believe that, first of all, of course, we have a constitutional and moral responsibility to everyone who lives in this country, and Aboriginal Canadians are a part of that responsibility that the Constitution has given and that we share with all our fellow citizens. That being said, as when I became Justice Minister, and you get the usual number of briefings, I was aware of this program before I became Justice Minister, but or some of the areas that we are involved with Aboriginal Canadians, I like the idea that it was flexible in terms of our ability to support different ideas, different projects. Again, it's very difficult to measure exactly how much of a difference is, but each year that I get reports on these and briefings on all the different aspects of this department, this is one of the areas that I've continuously been encouraged on, and so I believe it works. And again, we have that responsibility. Certainly, when I've had my discussions with the territorial justice ministers, they are very, very much supportive of these initiatives, and I've indicated to them that yes, there is federal support for the projects that they're undertaking, and I said that kind of cooperation and support will continue because we all have a stake in helping each other. So it's been good.
Thank you, Senator Lang. Senator Baker.
Madam Chair. First of all, the Minister said this is exactly the same bill. It's not exactly the same bill because you've introduced now a short title to this particular bill that you didn't have there before. That's number one. Number two, I'll also ask you to verify that in answer to Senator Wallace, who said that this bill does nothing concerning possession of drugs, I ask you to verify that when you place drugs that are in Schedule 3 up to Schedule 1, you, in a relative sense, you do change the entire characteristic of it in the adjudications before the court.
Yes, the title is slightly different, Senator Baker. The contents are the same. With respect to moving things like date rape drugs into making them more serious offenses, it'll become a more serious offense if you're the person's in the business of placing date rape drugs into usually women's drinks. There will be more serious consequences.
How about Ritalin? I mean, when I look at the drugs that are here, that are in Schedule 3, I don't know what these drugs are. That's number one. We've examined this content of this bill over and over and over, but I've never been told by the department, I don't think anybody else has, as to what these drugs are. I know from reading some judgments that drugs, for example, that are associated with attention deficit disorder are in Schedule 3. Well, the movement of that drug, or Addisol 30, or any of these other common drugs, but of course codeine is already up there. But in moving these drugs that are prescribed for children up to Schedule 1 and making the exchange of that drug a life imprisonment offense, that's the maximum you could receive for it if you give it to somebody or pass it to somebody. See, Minister, look, everybody agrees with your intent here. Your intent is to get at organized crime. My goodness, you've said that a million times in all of the bills you've put through. And everybody respects that. Nobody disagrees with that. But in carrying out that intent, when you look at the word trafficking, the word that's used around this table and in the House of Commons on a daily basis, and the public of Canada think trafficking, oh boy, yeah, this is organized crime. No, trafficking is, yes, it's organized crime, but it's also just passing a joint of marijuana to somebody or a pill of ecstasy to somebody. And the cases are countless cases. It's a fact. So when you create mandatory, so your major criticism against you in this bill, as I'm sure you're aware, is when you take away the discretion of a judge and you create a mandatory sentence, you go to jail for a year, you go to jail for 2 years, if you've done something else and a designated offense. What's a designated offense? It's passing one joint in the previous 10 years. And when you take away the discretion of the judge, and in those Schedule III drugs, you've taken away the discretion from the Crown because they're hybrid offenses. Schedule III, when you look at Schedule III, it's hybrid. Crown makes a choice. You put them up into Schedule I, it's indictable. So when you take away the discretion of the judge, but you don't change the definition of trafficking, I mean, we're not changing the definition of trafficking here. You can understand why some people take great exception to having mandatory minimums when there's no discretion for somebody to say, okay, this is not a serious case of trafficking.
Will take that as a question, Senator?
Yes, sorry about that, Madam Chair. I got carried away there. Sorry for that.
In answer to your question, Senator, the drugs, or what has been moved from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1, are only amphetamines and the date-rape drugs. Those are the ones that are being moved. So yes, if you're trafficking in date-rape drugs, and again, it's a question by the Crown Attorney, isn't it? And the police and the Crown Attorney as to whether an individual who is dropping these drugs into women's drinks, whether they should be charged with trafficking, that is where the discretion comes in. And all of these turn on a question of fact, and that hasn't changed, Senator Baker. But as you pointed out, you said that I have repeated on many occasions that the people who are involved with the importation, exportation, production of these and the traffic of these things are organized crime and gangs. I stand by that, and this is why you should support this. There's no problem with the definition of trafficking, and again, in each of these cases, whether a person is charged with possession or trafficking, that is in the hands of the Crown Attorney as to how to proceed in this country. It's a question of fact, and each case will be decided on its own merits. But yes, we are moving amphetamines and date-rape drugs to Schedule 1, and I think that's the appropriate place for them.
And could the Department verify to this committee at a future meeting, if they can't do it today, that not one of these drugs being put up in the Schedule 1 is prescribed to children for attention deficit disorder? I mean,
it's like anything else, Senator. I mean, you can get a prescription for marijuana, in this country, but people who are into the business of trafficking in marijuana, that becomes a crime. It depends on what you do with the drugs. If the drug is to intoxicate an unsuspecting individual, yes, we believe that is a serious crime in Canada, and this is why we have moved that from Schedule 3 to Schedule 1.
Yeah, but the reason why we amended the original, I'm sorry, I will be very quick, very fast, and so on. The reason why the amendment was made that you referenced earlier to the bill in the first place here was because of the definition of trafficking. That this bill in Section 1, if you've been convicted of a designated offense in the previous 10 years, passing a joint of marijuana at a university, and you do it now under this bill, you're going to go to jail.
Well, I'll tell you what, Senator.
You're going to be up for a life imprisonment, which carries with it all kinds of other ramifications under the code for that offense.
Well, Senator, you may have examples where the maximum sentence was given. I'd be very interested to see that. What we are saying is that that individual who, in your say, this is just minor trafficking, to use your example, if that individual has been convicted within the last 10 years and now they are convicted again of trafficking, I would suggest to you that's an individual who's not getting the message, and that there should be serious consequences for that individual who is not getting out of the drug business. He or she should get out of the drug business, and that, yes, there are serious consequences, and that individual who must be quite familiar with the legal system, if they've had one or more convictions of trafficking in the last 10 years, they should get the message, and they won't like this bill, I'm quite sure, that because you're right, because the next time they're caught trafficking, there will be very serious consequences.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Senator Baker.